Following video is part of my practical TypeScript course. And if you wish to enroll in the full course, please navigate to codingaddict.io. Again, the URL is codingaddict.io, or you can utilize the link provided in the description. All right. And we have finally arrived at the type alias. At least in my opinion, one of the most exciting topics, because once I learned the topic, I was super excited since it just eliminated a bunch of clunky code. And for this one, I actually want to start with the code already present because I want to cover some stuff, and I highly encourage you to do pretty much the same. There's really no need to type this from the scratch. So grab it from the README and then let's go line by line. So we have two objects and we nicely set up over here the type annotations where ID is a number, name is a string, and is active is a boolean. So if I'm setting up some wrong values, TypeScript is going to be super helpful. And then we have a function, which again is looking for a user, and that user must have this particular shape. ID is a number, name is a string, and is active is a boolean. Okay, beautiful. And not only that, but from this function, for some weird reason, we return the same thing. We return the same shape. We return ID, name, and is active. And as far as the functionality, we just set it to uppercase and then return the user. And I can tell you right away that there's nothing wrong with this code as far as functionality. All of this works. But what is the biggest issue? I mean, we have code over here, same code over here, same code over here, and then we have the return. And this is just one file. What do we have? Like 20 lines of code? And pretty much we just constantly keep repeating this. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to a type alias in TypeScript, which again, in my opinion, is extremely helpful feature. Now, before we continue, let me just make sure that we are all on the same page. You see, a type alias is just a new name or a shorthand for existing type. And in this case, we're talking about this type over here, this type annotation. So nothing is actually going to change as far as this syntax is concerned. However, with type alias, it's going to be easier to reuse this one. So again, please keep in mind, we're not creating a new type. It's just an alias, and all of the same rules apply to the alias one. That's why I wanted initially to cover how we set up such inline type annotation, because nothing is going to change as far as our functionality, including the optional property and read-only modifier. The only difference, well, now the code is going to be in one place. So if we ever want to change something, we will only need to do that in one specific place. And also our code is going to be less clunky because we'll just use that name. And once I'm done with my long and boring monologue, why don't we set it up? And essentially the syntax is following. We want to go with type. That's the keyword. Now the convention is to go with the uppercase, but you don't have to. I mean, you can call this also like this, but in my case, I will go with user. And like I said before, the syntax is the same. So I simply want to take my first instance and set it equal to my user. So now all throughout my file, document, project, whatever, I can use this user, and this will mean the same exact thing. So in here, I can go with, yeah, John is going to be object, and a type is actually going to be user. Same is going to be over here. Susan is going to be a user. Now, when we're creating a user, what is a type? Well, it's a user type. And you can probably already guess the same is going to be over here. So we can go with user. And now, $1,000,000 question, which one is easier to manage and read? And if you said the second one, you're absolutely correct. So I can mess with you and say that, you know what? No, actually, this one was easier to work with. But in reality, we can clearly see that this is definitely easier to work with. And I'm skipping a little bit ahead, but we can actually also export this one as well. So it's definitely an option. So let's say we set it up in one file, and then if we ever want to use this type alias somewhere else, we can nicely export it, import it in the file, and we're pretty much good to go. Okay, before we move on and start working on our next challenge, I also want to quickly showcase that we're not limited to using type alias for object. So it's definitely an option. It's definitely something we're going to do, but you can also do it for our previous examples as well. For example, I can go here with type. I'm going to call this string or number, and I'll set it equal to string, then use the union type and set it equal to a number. So now anywhere in my project where I want to use the union string or number, I can use my type alias instead of this hard-coded value. So let's say there's a value. This one will have a type string or number, and then we can go with value hello, and also we can set the value equal to 1, 2, 3. Now, is this something you're going to see often? Most likely not, but still, I definitely want to make sure that you know that it is a possibility. Now, something that you will see quite often, at least in my code, is this. I'm going to set up an alias, but in this case, I'm doing that for the literal type. So I'm going to go with light or dark. So this will be my theme, and those are the values. So it can be only light or dark. And now, if I have a theme variable, I can go with type theme. Then let me just change the values here. Notice how I right away have only these two options, something I have discussed already quite a few times. And in this case, I'm going to go with light. And what's also super, super awesome, that I can use the same theme one in the function. So if I go here with set theme, it's going to be looking for a parameter by the name of t. And the type over here is actually going to be a theme. And now I want to set my theme variable equal to whatever parameter gets passed in. So now when we invoke the theme, same deal over here. Notice how we can only use these two values. Again, super, super helpful, especially as your project grows bigger. So we can nicely set up this alias and then use it when we set up the property or when we pass some parameter in the function. And up next, let's work on another challenge. And during the challenge, we'll cover a few interesting things. We'll cover how we can set up type alias with the array, how we can set up type alias with type union, and how to set up a type guard if we're working with the object. So here's the challenge. We want to set up two types. One is going to be the employee type, and second one will be a manager type. Now, for employee, we'll set up two instances, and then I guess manager will set up only one. Now, the key difference is that for a manager, there's going to be employees property, and it's actually going to be an array of employee types. So this is where we'll combine the alias with the array. And then we want to set up a function, which actually is going to accept both types, whether that is the employee or the manager. And if the instance is the manager, then we just want to showcase how many employees they have. And if it's not the case, then we'll just log in which department the employee is working. So let's try to set this one up. I'm going to go with my alias first, and I'm looking for employee. So this one will set it equal to an object. There's going to be an ID property, which is a number. Then we'll go with name. We'll set that one equal to a string. And then also there's going to be a department. And for some reason, I have a hint that this is not correct typing. So let me fix that. So we're looking over here for department, which is a string. Now, There's also going to be an alias for manager. For this one, same deal. ID, number, name, string. So let me just copy them in order to make it faster. And now I want to set up the employees, which is going to be an array. But an array of what? It's not going to be an array of strings or numbers. And if you remember, in one of the previous examples, we actually covered that we can set up type to be an object. Only in this case, we already have the type alias for that. So I can simply say, yeah, it's going to be an array, but it's going to be an array of employees. Okay, good. Now let's set up those instances and then we'll work on a function. So for starters, there's going to be first employee. We'll right away set up the type just so we don't mess up anything. ID 1, then name. Let's set it up. And also let's come up with the department. In my case, I'm going to go with sales. Let me copy and paste. Now I want to change the variable name. So in here, we'll set up as Steve. Same deal over here. And then as far as the department, let's go with HR. Then let's set up our manager as well. So this will be Bob. The type will be manager. ID 1, name, Bob, or Bobo, even better. And then we'll go with employees. And this is our array, correct? So now I want to grab Alice and Steve. So let's set these two up. And now let's invoke the function, the print staff details. But of course, before I can invoke it, it would be useful if we would have this function in the first place, correct? So let me come up with the function. I'm going to call this print staff and then details. But here's the kicker. How are we going to pass this in? Because at the moment we have two types. So are we going to pass in just employee and then set up another function for the manager? Or we can somehow, somewhere combine the two. And the answer is, well, we can use the type union. So essentially I can go with type and then staff and set it equal to employee, or it's going to be a manager. And now this is our type. So now I can nicely go to print staff details and say, okay, there's going to be an object. And as far as the type, it's actually going to be equal to a stat. Now, I do want to set up the void over here since we're not going to return anything. And now another $1 million question. Well, how we can check whether the staff object is the employee or the manager. Because if it's a manager, then we do have an array. But if it's the employee, that's not the case. And we cannot go with, well, is type of equal to an object? Well, both of them are equal to an object. So that's not going to make much difference. Here's what we want to do. So we want to go with our condition, and then we need to pick a property, which is specific to the object. So in this case, that's the employees, correct? So we go here with the property and we say in, and then our object over here. So that's the staff. If it's the case, well, then we know that it's a manager. If not, then we know it's a staff one. So let's go and log something here. We're going to go with staff name. So let me access this one, staff.name, and then we'll say is an employee in the specific department. So in here, we want to access, again, the staff one. And now we're looking for department. Again, a property which is not on a manager. And again, TypeScript is smart. It knows that if there's an employee, this is going to be a manager. If not, well, that's the staff then. And I can access the department. So let me add this one. And now I want to just grab this console log and we'll just change a few things around. It's still going to be a console log, but we're going to go with manager. And notice how right away TypeScript is correcting us. Essentially, it says, well, department does not exist on type manager. So now what do we want to do? Well, we'll remove this. We're going to go with employees and we're looking for length. And let's just type employees. Okay, good. Let's try it out. I'm gonna navigate to the bottom and we're gonna go with print staff details. Let's pass in the first one and then let's also pass in the Bob. Once we navigate to the browser, we see that Alice is the employee and Bob is the manager. So this is how we can combine multiple features. This is how we can set up type alias with the type union. This is how we can start using type aliases with the array. And this is how we can set up a type guard if we are working with the object. Next, let's discuss the intersection type in union, which is a way for us to combine multiple types into one. Let's imagine this scenario. We have a type book. It is equal to a number. Name is equal to a string. And there's also a price. So we set up this number over here and we're good to go. Then let's create, let's say, two instances. I'm going to call this book1 is equal to an object, and let's right away set up our type, our book type, and then in here, let's provide some dummy values. ID will be equal to 1, name will be how to cook a dragon, because why not? And also, let's set up some kind of price. So in this case, it's going to be some random 15. Then let me copy and paste. And instead of book1, this is going to be book2. Now the type will stay the same. The ID will be 2. As far as the name, we're going to go with The Secret Life of Unicorns. And we're going to set the price equal to 18. So all this is good, but what if I have a discounted book? Where not only I have these three properties, but there's also a discount. So first, let's set it up, and you know what? I think we can speed this up a little bit. Where it's not going to be a book. We're going to go with discounted book. Okay, good. Now, for now, type will be book, but clearly we'll have some issues. I can right away tell you that. Then let's come up with a name. In my case, I'm going to go with this one. Price will be equal to 25. And we also want to add this discount property, and we'll set this one equal to 0.15. And notice the moment we do that, Typescript complains. Why? Well, because it's not in our types. So there is no discount anywhere here. So what's the solution? Well, we could create another type, correct? We could just copy and paste and set up over here a discounted book type and then just add that discount property. It's definitely an option, or we can nicely utilize the intersection type. How's that going to look like? Well, we have multiple ways how we can set this up. You can definitely do it over here in line, where you go with AND operator, and you just add what more types you want to have for this particular instance. So in this case, I can go with discount, and I can set it equal to a number. And notice Typescript doesn't complain anymore. So now essentially, it uses all of the properties from the book type already, but we just added nicely the discount as well. So that's one option, or we can set up another alias. Now the logic here is not going to change. So I can just cut it out and go type, then discounted book. And we're going to set it equal to this one. So now for my discounted book, I can use the discounted book type alias. And again, the difference with union type, it's either going to be this type or the type on the other side of the pipe. However, with the intersection type, now we combine them. Now we say, yeah, it's going to have all of the properties that we have in the book type. And also there's going to be this discount one, which is a type number. All right. And at the end of the type alias section, I quickly want to mention that type alias also supports computed properties. So effectively, we don't always have to hard code. For example, if I have a tiger object, and eventually I'll set up the type, you know what, for now, let's just set up the object. In here, I can go with age and set it equal to 5. So nothing new. But we can also set up a variable in there, we'll have a string, and we'll actually use that string as a property name. So straight up JavaScript. Let's say we're going to go with const prop name, and we're going to set it equal to age. And now instead of hard coding, I can just go with prop name. So if I'm going to change the string value, now my property is also going to change over here in the tiger. And we can do the same thing in the type alias. I can go with type animal. Let's set it equal to our object. And then instead of hard coding, we're going to go with prop name and set it equal to a number. I just need to follow the proper syntax over here. And now let's set up the type for the tiger. And we're good to go. So just like in regular JavaScript, we can use computed properties in type alias. Okay, and up next, let's cover interface type, which is used to describe the shape of an object. As a side note, we are purposely covering interface type right after type alias, simply because they are very similar. And yes, before you ask, quite often you can use either one of them, and the result is going to be the same. Now, what do programmers do when the same thing can be achieved in multiple ways? Well, we argue about it on Twitter and try to convince everyone else that our solution is somehow, some way better. Why? Because apparently that's the best use of our time. And remember, if all the other arguments don't work, you can always say, it's just a better practice to do it. Apparently that one always works. Jokes aside, I do personally prefer type alias over interface, and therefore during the course, most likely you'll see type alias syntax more often, but just like I mentioned before, it really comes down to your preference, despite what yet another Twitter guru says. Okay, hopefully I did not scare you away with my joke/rant, and if you're still here, let's set up a book object. So I'm going to navigate to my tutorial. I'm going to call this deep work, and you'll see in a second why. So we're going to go here with deep work. If I only would know how to spell, this is going to be my object. We're going to go over here with this ISBN, which essentially is just used for books as the ID. So in my case, I'm just going to go with 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to come up with title. I'm going to call this deep work. As a side note, this is an awesome book. Again, I'm by any means not being sponsored, or I'm not trying to sell you this book, but this is an awesome book. You won't regret whatever dollars it costs. So we're going to go over here with author. That is going to be Cal Newport. Awesome. And then let's also set up the genre. And I believe it's self-help. And we're looking for help. Now I do need to add over here a comma. And we already know how to set up the type alias. So probably this is something we're going to set up at the very end. But we also can use the interface. Again, this is something that we use if we want to describe the shape of the object. Now, the keyword is interface. Then we come up with a name. Same deal, lowercase, uppercase, totally up to you. In my case, I'm going to go with the uppercase. And then instead of the equal sign, we just want to set up over here the curlies. And then same deal. We go with the property name and then the type. And I right away want to mention that the read-only modifier, which we covered with type alias, as well as the optional property, is also allowed. And therefore, I'll go right away with read-only. Then I'll target basically this book ID, and I'll set it equal to a number. Remember, if we'll try to modify this value later, it's not going to work. Then also, let's set up a string. Okay, beautiful. That's going to be for the title. Then the same deal we're going to do with author. We're going to set it equal to a string. And the same is going to be for genre, but I'm going to set it as optional. Again, just so we get this one out of the way. I don't think we need to spend a separate video on these two things since we have covered them before. And effectively, if I go here, where is my deep work? And if I set it equal to my book, I'm good to go. So if for some reason I go with a deep work and try to modify this property, which is read only, let's say I'm going to go with some value. Notice Typescript is going to complain. Same deal is going to be if I'll try to add a property that doesn't exist. Let's say price, and I'm going to set it equal to 100. That is not going to work. And then let's say for genre, since it's optional property, I can just remove it, basically comment out, and my code is still going to work. And if you enjoy working on the challenges, you can set up a type alias for this deep work object. And you'll see that in this scenario, you can use either of those approaches, and the result is going to be exactly the same. Okay, and up next, let's discuss methods in interfaces. And we're gonna spend few videos on it, just because it's not, in my opinion, a complex topic, but it can be a little bit confusing because you can set up methods as properties as well. So essentially, you can mix and match, and at that point, it might look a little confusing. So start with just straight up approach, which is my preference, and then I'll show you the alternative code that you might see somewhere in the wild. So effectively, if this book has, for example, a method of print author, I just go directly to my interface. In this case, I'm going to add a comment, and I'm going to come up with that method. Now, please keep in mind, in here, we're not typing any logic. I'm just saying, yes, there's going to be a print method, or you know what, should be print author. But for some reason, I went with print method. It's not going to look for any parameters. And then as far as the return, it's not going to return anything. It's just going to log. So the moment I do that, now notice I have Typescript complaining because I haven't set up that method over here. You know what? Just so I have less code, I'm just gonna remove those comments over here. So now let's set up that method again. This is going to be my approach where I go with print author setup over here in my method. And in this case, I'm not looking for any params. We'll cover that in a second. And then we just go with log. And then since I'm not using the arrow function syntax, I can access any of these properties over here by using this. Again, we're going to cover the arrow syntax approach a little later. For now, we just want to log the author. That's it. So now let's go right after the object. We're going to go with deep work. Then we're going to invoke print author. And if everything is correct, we should see in a console the author. So let me take a look at the browser. And yep, I have my Cal Newport, so my logic works. Now, what is the syntax if there's going to be a parameter? Well, let's try it out. In this case, I'm going to go with print title, and I'm just going to add some message after the title. I'll say this book is awesome or something along those lines. So let's go here with title. We set up the parameter. As a side note, this name doesn't need to match whatever we set up over here in the instance. So here I'm just saying, yes, there's going to be some kind of parameter, and I'm going to reference this as message. Now type is going to be string, and just for kicks, let's also return from this function. Again, we're not setting up any kind of logic over here. I'm just saying that there's going to be a method by the name of print title. So now we want to scroll down, and same deal. We want to set up our function. So I'm going to go to print title, and I'm just going to call this value just to showcase, again, they don't need to match. Now, is my preference to set them up the same? Yes. But again, that is just my preference. And then inside of the function, same deal. In this case, I do want to return. And notice how Typescript essentially is complaining that, hey, you said that it's going to be a string over here, and at the moment it's still void. What's up with that? So let me just access again, this dot, since we're not using the arrow function, then we can access nicely title. And I'm going to provide over here whatever message is going to be passed in. And then let's keep on moving. I guess right after the print author, either we can log it right away, or in my case, I think I'm just going to store it in a result. So let's go with deep work, then print. Nope, it's not the one. We want to go with print title, and then let's say is awesome book. So this will return a string. So what do we do with string value? Well, we log it. And yes, it looks like everything's correct, but text is not. So let me set it up properly over here. Again, if we have a method, in here we just set up the blueprint. So what is going to be the method name, whether we're going to accept any parameters. If we do, then it's useful to set up right away a type, and also whether we're going to return something from this function or no. And then inside of the instance, we set up the method, and we just need to follow our blueprint. So if we're not returning anything from this function, we just set up the functionality. If we are returning, we need to make sure that the types match. And with this syntax, we can access any properties by using this keyword. Okay, and up next, let's cover an alternative way how we can set up methods in interfaces. Now, let me stress something. Technically, this video is optional. I just wanted to cover this because you might encounter such syntax somewhere in the wild, but I personally tend to stick with the approach we covered in the previous video, simply because I find it way more straightforward. Alternatively, we can set up the method in the interface as a property. How's that going to look like? Well, we can go here with print something. And again, the example is going to be pretty straightforward. And essentially, we set it here equal to a function. But please keep in mind, this is a syntax. We're not setting up over here the arrow function. This is just the syntax that we're using. So we say that it's going to return a number, and then we set it equal to some value and pass in the number. And now with this property in place, we want to go to a deep work object. And here we have quite a few options to set up this function. So I'm going to add these comments. I'm going to say first option, then there's going to be a second option. And I believe there's going to be a third one as well, but we'll see. Most likely I will improvise as we go. So first option, well, we can use the good old function keyword. So I'm going to go with print something. That's going to be my property right now. Then I go with function, same deal. It's looking for some value. Now, what is going to be the value? That will be a number, correct? And then as far as the function body, just so I return a number, essentially, I'm just going to go with some value. Now, let me scroll down a little bit. I mean, most likely we can just remove these values just so our console is less busy and I can go with my deep work. Then let's go with print something. We want to pass in some number. Why not 34? And then let me set up the log and let me move this sucker inside. Then let me remove my semicolon. Let's navigate here. And notice I have 34. So again, instead of setting up the straight up method, now I set up the property, which is equal to a function. In here, if I have some parameters, then I set up the type. And I also say, well, what is this function returning? Again, you don't have to return something from this function just because it's a property right now. So that is going to be our first option. Okay, let's comment this one out. And our second option is going to be arrow function. So we can go here with print something. Remember, we want to access the some value. That is going to be our parameter. And then as far as the logic, I'm going to go with some value. Now, there's a reason why I'm setting up the curlies. I'm fully aware that we can set up the implicit return. The reason for that is because I wanted to showcase that there's a gotcha with this and arrow functions. So arrow function is gonna capture the globalness. Please keep that in mind if you're using arrow functions. Unlike the good old regular function, where we right away have access to this, which is scoped to this instance, it's not going to be the case with the arrow function. So for example, if you want to access any of the properties, in my case, I'm going to go with author. We'll have to go with deep work and then the author. Now let's navigate over here. Notice we have both. We have the 34 and we also have the author. So this will be our second option. And I guess what was somewhat confusing is the fact that you can also do another way where I can go with print something and effectively just use the syntax we already used before. So this also is going to work. And that's why, again, my preference is just to use this approach where I set up the method and I clearly do the same thing inside of my instance. So this will also work. So we can go here with return and then some value, print something, and notice once we navigate back to the console, this also works. And lastly, I'm not trying to confuse you too much, but this also is going to work. So notice we have over here this print author, which is set up as a method, but we can set this one up as a property. So we can go here with print author. Now I believe TypeScript is going to complain, so I'll uncomment the first one, my approach, I guess. If I have a property, then we're going to go with print author, and we will set this up as a property, and we'll set it equal to an arrow function. Again, not trying to confuse you too much, but just showing you alternative syntax that you might see somewhere. Again, remember, we don't want to use this. We actually want to go with deep work, and then we're going to look for author. Now, TypeScript will complain since I already have my first approach. But again, if you navigate to the console, you'll see that the result is there. Now, I'm not calling print author. That's the reason why I don't have it. Let me go here. Let me invoke it. And you'll see that as far as functionality, it works. Again, what's confusing is that you can set the property equal to a function. So instead of straight up method, you set up a property, which is actually equal to a function. And then you can start doing this mix and match where, yeah, it was a property, but then actually in here, it's going to be a method and then the other way. That's why my preference is to set up methods with this syntax and the same in my instance. Just set up straight up methods simply because, in my opinion, it's just less confusing. Hopefully I didn't lose too many of you. And with this in place, now we can start working on our next task. Okay, and once we're familiar with the interface fundamentals, let's work on a small challenge where we want to set up a computer interface. Inside of it, we want to set up a few properties. One is going to be read-only, which is going to be for object, then brand equals to string. RAM is going to be number. Upgrade RAM will be a method. And in there, we're going to be looking for number, and we'll return a number. And also, there's going to be a storage property, which is going to be optional, but the type is going to be number. Also, once we have the interface, we will set up the instance and we'll provide the properties apart from the optional one. And then finally, we'll also invoke the upgrade RAM method. So let's try it out. Let me set up my interface. Name will be a computer. Let's go line by line. This one will be read-only. So I'll set it equal to my ID. Then brand equals to a string. After that, let's go with RAM. That will be number. Okay. Then upgrade RAM. This one will be a method. So we'll look for increase And this actually is going to be a number. Now from this function, we want to return a number. And then also let's set up the storage, which will be optional, and we'll set it equal to a number. So now let's create our instance. In my case, it's going to be a laptop. So set it equal to our object, and we right away want to set up our interface type. Now let's pass in those values. There will be an ID. Then a brand is going to be a random brand. After that, we have a RAM. We'll set it equal to 8. I guess 8 gigs. And let's also set up our method, upgrade RAM. As far as the parameter, I'm going to go with a different name just so you can see that for sure everything works, even though the names don't match. And in here, let's just set up the functionality where we grab the current RAM value and we just add the amount which is passed in. And then since I want to return a number, I'm just going to go with this dot and RAM. This is what we're returning. Since the storage is optional, I'm not going to pass it in. Let's just set up our instance, then storage, and now I'm going to set it equal to 256. We can log it. So let's go here with our laptop. Let's see. Yep, I have my object, ID, brand, RAM, and everything up to the upgrade RAM. And also let's invoke the upgrade RAM. Let's pass in some value and let's keep our console log. So we're going to go over here with another one, I guess, since we're returning the value. So let's go with laptop, upgrade RAM. Let's pass in some kind of value. In my case, I'm going to go with 4. And then if everything is correct, this is what we're getting back from the method. And also our RAM, instead of 8, is actually equal to 12. Okay, and up next, let's see how we can perform interface merging, how we can extend the interface, and then we'll work on another challenge. And during that challenge, we'll see how we can use type guard with interface. For starters, I want to create 2 interfaces, one for person and one for dog owner. Now, both of them will have 2 properties, I guess. Well, one is going to be a method, name, and let's say details. So let's go with interface. I'm going to go with person. I'm looking for name. I'll set it equal to a string. And also there's going to be a get details method, which will return a string. So that's my person one. And I also want to set up one for dog owner. So let's just go here, dog owner. So that one will have a dog name, I guess. That's going to be my property name, which is going to be a string. And then instead of get details, we're going to go get dog details. Let's invoke it. And again, we're looking for a string over here. Okay, beautiful. And first, let's see how we can merge the interfaces. So once I have my person one, I want to create my object. I'm going to call this person, and the type is going to be equal to my person interface. Now, what are the 2 values we need to provide? First, we need to go with John, and as I note, I'm missing here the equal sign. And the second will be the get details one. So let's just go with get details. That's the function. And we're gonna set up the functionality with the template string, name, colon. Then let me access this dot. So this dot name. And also let's add age. So this one will also be equal to this dot and then the age. Now, notice over here how we don't have the age, correct? And one way is to go back and set it up over here in this person. But there's another way how we can add this property, and that is by merging the interfaces. And I know that this looks a little funky in the beginning. Please keep in mind that most likely you're not going to do that in the same file, but let's say if you are getting the interface from somewhere, if you know the name, you can do something like this. And as a side note, yes, essentially I'm using the same name. I go with interface person, and then I just go with age number. So I add that extra property over here. Now, this also needs to be in my instance, correct? So in here, I need to come up with some kind of value. And now the get details is correct. I can access both the name and age. So I have the first one, and then I just merge. So whatever properties I'm going to set it up over here, yes. Essentially, if I create this instance, now all of these properties will have to be there. Hopefully that is clear. Now, just to showcase, let me go with person dot and then get details. Let's invoke it. And for some reason, I don't see anything in the console. And of course, because I'm returning. So what am I doing here? Let me go with my log. Let me move this sucker up. And now let's try it out. Yep, I have name John and age is 30. And up next, let's see how we can extend the interface, which is a way for us to create a new interface that inherits or essentially just uses the properties and methods from the existing interface. Now, it sounds more complex than it actually is. Imagine this scenario. We have an employee instance. And for now, we're not going to set the type. Let's just set it equal to an object. I'm going to go with some kind of name. I'm going to go not with John. Let's go with Jane over here. Then let's also set up the age, because remember, we already added this to a person. So now essentially we need name, we need get details, and we also need an age. So let's set up some kind of age here. Then let's go with our details. However, in this case, since we're going to add one more property, the return is going to be a little bit different. Here's the thing. Jane is a person. That kind of makes sense, correct? So I can definitely set it equal to a person and call it a day. However, let's imagine that Jane, since she's an employee, she also has the employee ID. Now, I don't want to add it to a person. So I want to keep this as a separate interface. But I do want to use all of the properties that I already have in my person one and just add on that employee ID. So here's how we can do that. We go with interface, then come up with a name. In my case, I'm going to go with employee, and then we go with this extends. And now we're just looking for a specific interface we want to use. And now let's just add this employee ID and set it equal to a number. So now Jane, not only she's going to be a person, but she's also going to be an employee. So now when we set up the type, we go with employee, and now not only I have name and age, but I also need to apply this employee ID. So let's add this one. Let's say over here 1, 2, 3, and then remember details needs to return a string. So in this case, I'm just going to grab whatever we have over here, and then let's just add the employee ID as well. So let's add a comma. We're going to go with ID, and then let's access this dot and then employee ID. Now, just so we can see that everything works, I guess instead of person details, let me go with employee, get details, and yep, I have all three values in the console. Now, we can also inherit from multiple interfaces. Essentially, I can extend from the person as well as the dog owner. So we're going to go with a manager instance, I guess. So we're going to go here with manager. Eventually, we'll set up the type. For now, I just want to provide a name. It's going to be equal to a Bob. And also for now, let's go with the age, which will be equal to a 35. Now, when it comes to Bob, not only is going to be a person, so we'll need to provide all of the properties, but also let's imagine that he's a dog owner. So essentially, we want to extend from both interfaces that we already currently have, the person and a dog owner. Now, since Bob is a manager, I also want to add a method onto the interface. And in my case, I'm going to call this manage people. So let's move where we have Bob. And first, I guess let's construct the interface and then we'll worry about the properties. So we're going to go with interface manager. For starters, let's just add that method that I was talking about. So I simply want to go with manage people. It's not going to take any parameters and we're not going to return anything. And if we set this equal to a Bob, we'll have an issue since we have two properties that we haven't set up in our interface. So now let's go with extends and one by one, let's look for those interfaces. So we're looking for a person and a dog owner. So Bob is a manager, a person, and a dog owner. And now if I navigate over here and set it equal to a manager type, I will have to provide all of these values. What they are, well, we need to provide a dog name. Let's go with Rex. It's a super popular name. Then we also have get details. And you know what? In this case, I will speed this up. I really don't want to type everything from the scratch. So we have get details. What do we want to access here? I guess let's just go with age since we don't have the employee ID. Then we also have one for dog. So let's go with get dog details. Now we will go with name is, and then let's access the dog name. Dog name over here. Then let's remove the age. I guess we don't need it. And lastly, let's set up that manage people. Manage people. Let's invoke it. And for now, we simply want to log. So let's set up a console log and let's write a text managing people. And lastly, just to test it out that everything works, I want to go with manager and let's invoke manage people. If everything's correct, we should have this text in a console. And again, this is how we can merge interfaces by essentially using the same name and just adding the properties. Another name that you might hear is reopen. Essentially, they mean the same thing, where we declare the interface with the same name one more time, and then Typescript is going to merge them together. And we can also extend. So let's say if we have an interface with some properties and methods, and we just want to grab methods and properties from some other interface, simply go with extends. We'll look for that specific interface, and in the process, we'll right away get those methods and properties. And with this in place, we can move on to the next task. And up next, let's work on another challenge. And during the challenge, we'll see how we can use type guard with the interface. Now, I did split up the challenge into multiple videos. So in the first video, we'll kind of prepare everything. We'll set up our function. We will return one of the interface types. And then in the following video, we'll work on more logic where we'll see how we can use the type guard. So I didn't want to jam everything in one video because there's quite a few lines of code. And I mean, the most important thing is kind of at the very end. And usually if it's a long video, then people just lose the interest. So long story short, we want to define a person interface with the name string. Then we want to set up a dog owner, which extends the person, and just add the dog name, which is going to be a string. And also we want to set up a manager, which extends the person. So not person and the dog owner. No, the manager is going to extend only the person. And we'll just add two more methods on it. Then we want to set up the instance, which can be either of them. So we'll use the union type, and actually we'll set it equal to get employee function. Now in there, in get employee, we'll just call math.random. And based on a value, we'll return one of those interfaces. So whether a person, dog owner, and a manager. And again, in the next video, we'll see how we can use the type guard, because there's a gotcha that we need to be aware of. For starters, let's navigate to tutorial one by one. Let's set it up. So this is an interface. We want to go with person. Let's go with name equals string. Okay. Then let's also set up a dog owner. So we have here interface dog owner. Now that one will extend the person. So we'll get that name property, and we also want to add the dog name. Dog name will be equal to a string. And then the last interface is going to be a manager, which is going to extend the person. And in here, let's go with manage people. That's our method. And we're simply going to go with void and also copy and paste. And let's say delegate tasks. So those are our two functions. And then let's set up our instance. But before we do that, let's also set up a function, and I'm going to call this get employee. And this is the function that we're going to use in our employee instance. So for starters, I'm going to go here with const employee. And as far as the type, I'm going to use the union type. So either it's going to be a person, or it's going to be a dog owner, or it's going to be a manager. And I'm going to set it equal to my get employee, and I'm going to invoke it. Now, I do want to move this function up, simply because in the following video, we'll write the code over here. I think it's going to be less confusing. So let me move it up. That's going to be our function. And here's the task. Inside of the get employee, I want to invoke math.random. And then based on the value, if it's say less than 0.33, well, then I'm just going to return a person interface. If not, then it's going to be a dog owner. And if not, then it's going to be a manager. So I have this employee. Notice over here, it just says, well, the moment you're returning void, and that's not what the employee is expecting. So in here, I'm looking for one of these three values. Now, in this get employee, we're not going to pass any parameters. We simply want to go with our logic. So let's set up the random. That one will be equal to math.random. So we'll get some random value between 0 and 1. And now let's just work on those returns. But also, let's set up the type right away. So we're looking for person. We'll also grab the dog owner, and potentially this could be a manager. So again, we don't know what the value is going to be. So every time we'll refresh the browser, we'll get some random value over here. And then based on that value, we'll set up that return. So let's start with our first option. If the value is less than 0.33. Well, in that case, I want to go here and I want to return a name John. So which interface is that? Well, that's the person one, correct? So these two match. Then let's also set up another else if. So if the random is less than 0.66, well, in that case, let me grab this, and now we just want to add the dog name. So in this case, we're going to go with Sarah, and we're going to go with dog name. And we're going to set it equal to Rex. Now, lastly, if it's not less than 0.33, if it's not less than 0.66, then we're going to go with another else. And in here, we want to return a manager interface. So in this case, we're going to go with return, then object, name will be equal to a Bob. And then let's set up those two methods. We're going to go with manage people. And as far as the logic, let me just go with console log. And we're going to say managing people. Okay, good. And then let's do the same thing for delegate tasks. That's my function. And as far as the text, it's going to match. Now let me navigate where I have the employee and let's just log it. Like I said, we'll have to refresh the browser. So once I navigate over here, notice this was my person instance. Then I get over here the manager, correct? Then I get the dog owner, and as you can see, every time we refresh the browser, we're getting a different value. So in here again, we want to set get employee, and we want to make sure that we only return one of these interfaces. We use the union type, and then when it comes to the instance, same deal. I'm looking for one of these three values. So employee is going to be either a person, a dog owner, or a manager. And in the following video, we'll introduce the type guard and make this challenge more complex. Okay, and with this in place, now let's make this challenge more complex by adding a function which is going to check for a specific interface. And only if it's a manager, we want to invoke delegate tasks. Because here's the kicker. We get back our object, we store it in the employee, and if we try to go with name, everything works. Why? Well, because dog owner extends the person, manager extends the person. So that property will be definitely there. We can navigate to the browser. We just need to refresh, and eventually we will see all three values. But it's different with delegate tasks. So notice, once you start typing, TypeScript is complaining. It says, well, listen, it could be either the person or a dog owner or a manager. So you don't know that 100% the delegate tasks is going to be there at runtime. And this is why we want to set up a function. And we'll start with somewhat straightforward approach. And then we'll cover why we want to use type predicate. So let's go here with a function. In my case, I'm going to call this isManager. So I want to make sure that it's a manager. And then in the if block, I'm just going to invoke delegate tasks. That's my overall goal. So I'm going to be looking for object because this is what we're getting back from employee. But same deal. As far as the parameter, well, it can be one of these three interfaces. Okay. Then as far as the return, like I said, for now, let's just go with the straightforward approach where I'm going to go with Boolean. Either it's going to be true or false. And I guess the first gotcha in here is the return. Remember previously when we used the type guards, we did something like this. We went with type of then object and set it equal to something. Now, is it equal to what? Object? Well, all of them are objects. So that's not specific. So if I invoke isManager with employee, this should return for all of them pretty much the same value. Let's try it out. We're going to go here with log isManager. Then let's pass in the employee and let's take a look at the console. Notice as I'm clicking, I'm all the time getting true. So yeah, this type guard is great, but it's not going to work in this case. So if we want to check for manager, we want to look for something specific. And that something specific is one of these methods. And the syntax is following, where we want to go with the method, which will pass in the string, and in, and then the parameter, in this case, object. So now let's correctly type one of the methods, in my case, manage people. And now let's navigate to the browser. And again, once we refresh, we'll actually see correct results. Only if the interface is manager, then we return true. And if it's not the case, then we return false. But there's another gotcha. So now let's go and set up if block. I'm going to go with isManager. I'll pass in the employee, pretty much our setup. And then let's try to invoke employee. And same deal. I don't have delegate tasks for some reason. Let me try to invoke it. And again, TypeScript is complaining. So here's the deal. Yes, our logic over here is correct. But just because we return a Boolean from this function doesn't automatically signal to a TypeScript that now employee is actually type of manager. And here, basically, yeah, we passed the if condition, but as far as TypeScript is concerned, it can be still one of these three types. And this is where type predicate is super useful. And that is a special kind of return that not only returns a Boolean, but also it asserts the argument to be a specific type. So what am I talking about? In here, instead of the Boolean, we can go with object. That's going to be the syntax is. And then since I'm checking over here for the manager, that's the interface I'm going to use. And now TypeScript definitely knows that once we pass this condition, this will be a interface manager. So once I navigate back over here, I can refresh. Once I'm getting back the manager, I'm also logging delegating tasks. Okay, and at the very end of the interface section, I also want to cover the differences between the interface and the type alias. So if you're setting up the object, since interface is used to provide the shape of an object, you can use either of them. So if I have object John with name and age, I can either use the alias type person, or I can use the interface person. Now, as far as the differences, you see, type alias, we can also set up for primitive types. For example, if I have number or the union type number or string, and the literal types. You won't be able to do that with the interface. So that's the first difference. Again, when it comes to interfaces, they're useful to provide the shape of an object, but you won't use them with the primitive or with the literal type. Now, with interfaces, we can merge them together like we covered before. Or another word is to reopen them. You won't be able to do that with the type. So with the interface, you can set up the interface, you can add some properties, then, I don't know, 3 lines later, you can create the same interface, basically with the same name, just add more properties, and you're good to go. That doesn't fly with the type. That's another difference. Now, as far as the interfaces, they can be implemented by the classes, while the type aliases cannot be implemented in such way. So if you work with classes, this is something to keep in mind. You can use the interface with the class, but you won't be able to implement the type alias with the class. And lastly, remember when we covered computed properties, you can only do that with type alias. So you won't be able to use the computed properties with the interface. And with this in place, now we can move on to our next topic.